Closed egress analysis, window and balcony door impossibility, a forensic behavioral examination of escape planning and the architecture of containment. When we examine the Ramsey home on the morning of December 26, 1996, we are forced to confront a question that few ask directly. Where was the exit? An unknown intruder supposedly entered the home through a basement window well. This person supposedly removed a child from her second-floor bedroom. This person supposedly evaded the parents sleeping on the third floor. This person supposedly kept the child quiet or incapacitated. This person supposedly took the child to the basement. This person supposedly held her captive or killed her there. And this person supposedly left the home, carrying the evidence, disappearing into the bolder night. But here is where we must stop and examine the architecture carefully, because when we trace this supposed intruder's path in and out of the home, we run directly into a problem that cannot be easily solved. There was no exit route prepared, no escape path available, no ladder waiting outside, no open door, no accessible second-story egress, nothing that would allow someone to rapidly, quietly, and successfully depart the home with a child in the middle of the night. This is the forensic detail that speaks most quietly, but most accurately about what actually occurred. The basement entry point. Difficult, not efficient court documents and interviews establish that an unknown intruder would have entered through the basement window well on the back side of the home. This window was located in the playroom/train room area of the basement. The window was accessible but required specific actions, removing or manipulating the grate that covered the window well, a heavy metal covering that required lifting. Entering the narrow window well, an approximately 4 to 5-foot drop into a confined space. Breaking the window pane. The window was reportedly already broken, but entry required, clearing glass, reaching through and unlatching the interior window mechanism, forcing the window open, climbing through the window into the basement room. This sequence describes an entry that is possible, but not efficient. It is not the choice of someone in a hurry. It is not the choice of someone expecting to make a rapid exit. It is the choice of someone willing to spend time on entry because the entry point offers privacy, hidden from the front of the house and from neighbors. But this entry method reveals something forensically significant. Whoever chose this route expected to be inside the home long enough for the entry effort to be worthwhile. An intruder planning a quick crime would not select such a time-consuming entry method. The chair in the doorway. What blocks an exit? One of the most forensically significant details is something John Ramsey mentioned during interviews. When he went to the basement on the morning of December 26th, he found a chair blocking the doorway to the playroom/train room where the broken window was located. In his interview with Lou Smith, the following exchange occurred. Smith: if an intruder went through the door, he'd almost have to pull the chair behind him, because that would have been his exit. Ramsey: right, it was blocked. Smith: and he would have had to move it back if he was in there trying to get out, is that correct? Ramsey: yeah. Smith: so that's not very logical as far as… Ramsey: I think it is. I mean, if this person is that bizarrely clever to have not left any good evidence, but left all these funny little clues around, they certain are clever enough to pull the chair back when they left. This exchange captures something that deserves deeper forensic analysis. The chair was blocking the exit. An intruder exiting through the window well would have needed to move that chair. The question then becomes, did the intruder move the chair back as they left, as Ramsey suggests a bizarrely clever intruder might do, or is the presence of the chair evidence of something else? The chair's position is itself suspicious. It suggests either Someone inside the home blocked the window exit path from inside, a parent creating barriers. Someone tried to leave through that exit but could not due to the obstruction. The chair itself becomes forensic evidence of interior behavior, not exterior intrusion. The second-story problem. Where was the ladder? The home had second-story spaces with windows and a balcony door. If an intruder needed to escape with a child, or with evidence, and if they had entered through the basement, they could theoretically leave through a second-story window or door. But here is where the architecture reveals its truth. There was no ladder. There was no prepared exit route. There were no windows accessible without falling. There was no rope. There was nothing that would allow someone to remove themselves and a child from a second story. To exit through a second-story balcony door or window, one would require a ladder positioned outside before entering the home, but no ladder was found. An external exit route prepared in advance. There was none. The ability to move a child down from the second story, requiring equipment that did not exist, or the willingness to drop a child from the second story, which would have produced injuries instantly visible and documented. The absence of these things, the absence of escape equipment, of ladder, of prepared exit, is itself evidence. It suggests that whoever was inside the home was not executing a premeditated abduction plan. A calculated abductor prepares exit routes. An experienced criminal plans escape. An intruder with any sophistication would have equipment positioned beforehand. The absence of such equipment suggests someone acting without preparation, someone acting in circumstances they had not fully anticipated, someone for whom an extended abduction scenario was not the original plan. The window locked. What does open actually mean? Court documents note that 7 windows and 1 door were found open on the morning of December 26, 1997. But the specific language deserves examination. Open, as described in legal documents, can mean various things: unlocked, ajar, fully open, accessible, etc. The documents further specify that at least 7 windows and 1 door were found open on the morning of December 26, 1997. A number of windows were accessible from the ground level, including a window well with removable grate, over 3 windows that opened into a playroom area of the basement. So, 7 windows and 1 door were open. But we must understand what open meant in the context of an intruder theory. Could a person actually exit rapidly through these openings? Were they truly accessible for escape? The basement window, the supposed entry-exit point, required climbing up 5 feet to reach the window well level. Exiting through the window, opening, navigating the narrow window well space, lifting the heavy grate covering from below, or having it already removed, reaching up to place the grate back. This is not a rapid exit. This is not a clean escape route. This is a sequence that requires time, physical exertion, and the ability to manage physical obstacles. For someone carrying a child, it would be nearly impossible. The balcony door. Second-story exposure. The home had a balcony door on the second floor. If an intruder needed to leave with evidence or with a child, accessing the second floor and exiting through that door would be more efficient than returning to the basement window. But the balcony door opened onto a second-story balcony with a 15-plus foot drop. There was no ladder. There was no equipment. There was nothing that would allow someone to descend safely. So the balcony door remained a poor option for escape. Someone exiting that way with a child would face 2 choices: attempt the drop, risking injury, or death to both themselves and the child. Remain trapped on the second-floor balcony, exposed to neighbors and the early morning light. Neither option is acceptable to a rational actor with escape options. The absence of escape equipment at the balcony door is not coincidental. It suggests that whoever was in the home did not plan to use that door as an exit. Planned escape routes are prepared with equipment. Impulsive actions leave doors unopened, balconies unequipped, windows blocked. The containment pattern. What the architecture reveals about behavior. When we step back from the forensic details and examine the overall pattern, we see a home with multiple entry points but no prepared exit routes. We see a home where an intruder could potentially enter through various means, but where leaving with a child would require navigation of obstacles, lack of equipment, and exposure to detection. This containment pattern reveals something about the psychological state of whoever committed this crime. A premeditated abduction, planned, researched, executed with intention, includes exit planning. Escape routes are identified. Equipment is positioned. Contingencies are considered. A calculated abductor knows how they will leave before they ever enter. But a crime born from crisis, from impulse, from tragedy that escalated, that crime often shows no evidence of exit planning. The perpetrator was focused on the immediate situation, not on escape logistics. The perpetrator was contained by the home's architecture because they had not planned to leave it. The containment pattern, locked doors, closed windows, no ladder, no prepared escape route, suggests that whoever was inside the home was either someone who did not intend to leave the home and take the child with them. They were in crisis inside the home. Someone who panicked and locked themselves in, suggesting guilt and fear rather than calculated planning. Someone who was not truly an unknown intruder, because an intruder would have prepared exit routes. The crime scene, geography, logic of movement versus logic of escape. An intruder supposedly entered through the basement. They supposedly moved upstairs to the second floor, entered a child's bedroom. They supposedly subdued the child, moved her back downstairs to the basement, to the wine cellar where she was found. This path shows logic of movement. The intruder accessed multiple levels of the home, but it does not show logic of escape. Having moved to the basement, how would they leave? Back through the difficult window well? Why not leave immediately after subduing the child, rather than taking her to the basement? Unless the child was moved to the basement not for escape purposes, but for concealment, for containment, for a purpose that had nothing to do with removing her from the home. An intruder's logic would be subdue, extract, escape, get out fast with the victim. But this scenario shows subdue, move to basement, contain, kill, or the killing occurred. Hide. The pattern is containment and concealment, not extraction and escape. The second floor balcony. Why no ladder? We must ask a direct question. If someone planned to abduct a child from a second floor bedroom, why would they not position a ladder outside that bedroom's balcony door before entering the home? A premeditated abductor would plan. Entry route. The basement window, apparently. Movement through home to child's bedroom. The stairs. Rapid subdual of child. The stun gun, apparently. Rapid extraction of child via prepared ladder at balcony door or similar equipment. Escape and disappearance. But the absence of ladder suggests that the abductor had no pre-planned escape equipment. The open window and prepared entry but closed balcony and no ladder suggest someone who had not fully planned this scenario. Someone who entered the home but did not prepare for rapid extraction. This contradiction, entry carefully planned, exit not prepared, is itself diagnostic. It suggests a crime that developed differently than what was intended. It suggests someone who entered the home for one reason and experienced the situation becoming something else entirely. The locked doors. Whose locks were they? When officers arrived on the morning of December 26th, They found the home with various doors secured. Some doors were locked from the inside. Some were accessible. The pattern of which doors were locked and which were not tells us something about who controlled the home during the crime. If an intruder had control of the home, they would secure exits to prevent escape by the child or others. They might lock doors from the inside to maintain control. They might unlock specific doors they planned to use for escape. The pattern of locked and unlocked doors in the Ramsey home suggests someone who was familiar with the home's systems, someone who understood the locking mechanisms, someone who could control access points from inside the home. This is not necessarily evidence of a Ramsey family member, but it is evidence against the casual intruder theory. It is evidence of someone with knowledge of the home's interior. The forensic principle, exit planning, reveals intent in forensic criminology. The presence or absence of exit planning reveals critical information about the perpetrator's mental state and intent. A premeditated crime includes exit planning. An experienced criminal has practiced escape routes. A calculated abductor has equipment staged in advance. The absence of these elements, no ladder, no escape equipment, no prepared exit route despite having carefully planned entry, suggests either an impulse crime that escalated beyond initial intent, a crime by someone inside the home who was not initially planning to leave with the victim, a crime by someone familiar enough with the home to know they could move through it, but not experienced enough in abduction to prepare exit routes. The lack of exit preparation points away from the narrative of a sophisticated abductor. It points toward someone in crisis, someone improvising, someone not executing a premeditated plan. The contained space. What the home architecture reveals. The Ramsey home, through its architecture and the arrangement of its security and access points on the morning of December 26th, functioned as a containing structure rather than a launching point for abduction. This is what forensic analysis reveals when we examine not just the obvious entry and crime scene, but the geometry of potential escape. An intruder should have planned escape as carefully as entry. An abductor should have positioned equipment outside the home before beginning the crime. A calculated criminal would leave nothing to chance, including how they would exit with their victim. But the absence of escape equipment, the presence of obstacles, the chair in the doorway, the lack of prepared second-story access, these things tell us that whoever committed this crime was not executing a calculated abduction plan. They were contained by the home's architecture because they had not planned for outside. They were contained by their own lack of preparation. They were trapped inside the very home they had entered. And in that containment lies the truth. This was not a crime that began with someone outside the home working inward. It was a crime that began inside the home and had no prepared exit. What the silence about exit planning reveals. We have spent years examining the broken window, the ransom note, the forensic evidence. We have traced supposed intruder paths from entry to crime scene. But we have largely avoided the simple forensic question: how was the perpetrator planning to leave? The absence of this question, the silence about exit planning, is itself revealing. It suggests that exit planning wasn't part of the scenario, that whoever was inside the home was not operating under the constraints of needing to escape, that this was not an abduction scenario requiring rapid extraction. The architecture tells the story, if we are willing to listen to what it reveals. No escape ladder, no prepared exit route, doors blocked from inside, windows accessible but difficult, a home converted into a containing structure rather than a launching point. And when we look at this architecture and ask the simple question, where would an intruder escape with a child? We are forced to confront that the answer is nowhere. There is no prepared escape. There is no equipped exit. There is only the reality of a home that contained the crime because the crime was already inside.
So I think personally what troubles me the most about the intruder narrative as it regards sort of like the exit plan that I've been thinking about. When we actually sort of think through the logistics, I think it's important that to me, as it seems, there is literally no exit route. Like, it's criminal, it's highly intelligent, prepared, no exit route. That's kind of weird to me. It spent several months planning it, and now that we know that they didn't spend several months planning it because they didn't even know how much money to ask for until the day of. You've got to be joking. Just wandered into the room the day of and found the checks and the paycheck stubs and said, you know what? I think I'm going to ask for $118,000. Today is the day that I thought about doing that. John, I've hated you for a long time. I really have. I know nothing about you, but I know everything about you at the same time. I've hated you for a long time, and I've never wanted anything from you. But now that I see money, I do want money, but I don't want money. Not sure. I have a problem with you, but I'll take your daughter. Not going to really be concerned with your wife or your son, just your daughter. So the logistics kind of throw me off a little bit because you have this intruder. I'm sorry. You have this intruder who supposedly comes through the basement window well. It's a pretty difficult entry. It's a little tight. I know Lou showed us that it could be done in respect. But, you know, you had to pick up the grate and get down there and put the grate back, which, you know, apparently the criminal did put it back just to kind of cover their tracks, in which they would have, to get back out with JonBenet, they would have had to move it back out of the way and then, you know, hoist JonBenet up onto the surface there right outside of the breakfast nook, which they would have now been going from the basement up to essentially the first floor. And so the intruder supposedly entered through the basement window well, which is a little bit difficult to me. And they're navigating this confined space in order to enter and possibly exit the house. It's a little time consuming, but fine. I don't think it's the choice, though, of somebody who's in a hurry. And we've said that. And obviously other aspects of how the intruder behaved in the house lets me know that he apparently wasn't in any hurry or in any fear of being caught. But then this intruder supposedly navigated the entire house. He goes upstairs during the time that the Ramseys are gone. He goes upstairs and sort of rummages through the home to find the necessary components, the rest of the second half, you know, of the components needed to finish committing this crime, and then to go back and hide somewhere to wait for the family to get home. Who knows? Maybe he hid out in Melinda's room that was adjacent there to JonBenet's room. Maybe he hid there. Who knows? And so he navigates the entire house, goes upstairs to the second floor, enters JonBenet's room, removes her, brings her back down to the basement, and confines her into the wine cellar. We don't know at what point that he decided that the wine cellar was the best place for them to go, but at some point in time, he said, you know what, I need to move you to the wine cellar. This is getting out of hand. Or maybe after the accident, he moved her to the wine cellar, so on and so forth. And at no point did this intruder, I think, position, I think, equipment for escape. There's, when they plan this thing, and that's what I'm saying, just like kind of thinking up things on the fly. This intruder was apparently thinking up things on the fly. I have my thoughts about that because that's what it seems like they were doing. Just kind of going with the flow, trying to figure things out. Very similar to someone who may literally be thinking of things on the fly. I'll leave that there. Very similar to somebody who may literally be thinking of things on the fly. It's almost as if this criminal had never committed a crime before. And they were doing things for the first time. Anyways, at no point did this intruder position equipment for escape. There's no ladder outside of the second story balcony floor, as we talked about before, that would save this intruder from being caught immediately if Patsy were to hear some talking and then be alerted or alarmed, whatever, and then go down there and be like, hey, what the heck are you doing down here, John? Could you please come down here? The criminal would have nowhere to go. You can't jump off a second story, a balcony. You would injure yourself pretty badly. Well, to be fair, Ted Bundy did it. So it's back in the field of play. But I think you would injure yourself pretty badly. And you'd have to slow down at some point, making you more of a target to be apprehended. And so there's no preparation of the exit route, really. Seems to be no escape equipment sort of staged beforehand. And that kind of makes me ask, obviously, as we've been thinking, if you're breaking into somebody's home with the intention of abducting a child, I would think that you would plan your exit as carefully as possible and definitely as careful as maybe your entry, right? Clearly, you knew when John and Patsy were going to be leaving. And so you were there, Johnny, on the spot to show up when they were leaving and to know how to sneak into the house so that nobody would catch you. Fair enough. I would think that if anybody took that type of person took sort of those precautions to plan their entry very carefully, then your exit would be just as carefully planned. You would have 1 to 2, an option A and an option B on how to get out of the house should things arise. And especially, I think you would sort of enhance your exit strategy based on the fact that you're exiting with someone rather than, as you did with the entry, you entered with no one, but you're exiting with someone. But when we talk about as we talked about before, I do question whether or not exiting was ever really an option or ever really on the table, because the person didn't know about the money until they got there. They didn't know how much John was making, apparently, until they got there and saw the paycheck stubs on the desk. And then the plan turned into some sort of robbery or whatever. But there was no exit plan. And it's really interesting to me, like we talked about before, this person positioned the ligatures in places that would not seem to indicate that they were planning a kidnapping. You know what I mean? Like I said, you would fasten, right? If you're taking somebody, you would, okay, let's accept the stun gun. Okay, well, you would put the rope around the wrist. Fair enough. The tape would go around the mouth. Okay, fair enough. But then the second rope would go around that you used for the head area would not be there. It would go down for the legs. Easy money. At what point in time did the intruders decide to take another break and say, you know what? instead of putting it around the legs and getting her out of here, I'm just going to put it in the head region. At what point in time did the criminal decide to do that? And for what reason did the criminal decide to do that? I'm confused. Because it seems as if they didn't need to do it, so they didn't. Anyways, a lot of inconsistency there. And to my original point that they didn't seem to have planned to exit with any child. Because if you bring stuff for an exit, but you don't use those things correctly for the exit, and you don't even know what you're going to exit based on, it's kind of weird to me. If you write a note saying that you were planning to kidnap somebody, but then you don't kidnap them because you kept getting kind of sidetracked, is essentially what's happening here. You're getting sidetracked. Not once, but twice. You got sidetracked first when you took her downstairs. You took JonBenet downstairs and fed her. That's the first sidetrack. For what? Then you got sidetracked again when you went downstairs and decided that you wanted to pivot into some sort of other part of this crime. That didn't need to happen. What criminal, help me, is making that decision? And so your exit would have been more difficult, but you decided to not go through with that exit because you would have had to, sort of navigate, moving a 6-year-old through a window, setting her on some leaves. Somebody would have had to go up first. One of the partners would have had to go up first if there were 2 people, move the grate out of the way, get up, and then kind of stand in the window well so that when they would have had to stand in the window well, because I was trying to think about whether or not you could open both windows to give yourself some more room, but they were individual, so you only have one. And so the person has to stand in the window well, because once either JonBenet is awake and willing to go through the window well so she can reach up to the person who's at the very top, or the person has to be standing in the window well, the very top space where they can't turn, mind you, because when we examine it, when we think about what Lou Smith had to do, Lou Smith was pressed up against the wall. He was pressed up against the side of the home trying to make his way down. So he could make his way down, but it was a very tight fit. And so somebody awaiting JonBenet to come through the window well would have to sort of be down there, but they would have to be sideways to pick her up. It's a very difficult position to do that in. And not jolt her and wake her back up, because clearly you want her asleep if you are using the stun gun. And the inconsistency of the use of the stun gun is puzzling me as well. And so they pull her up through the window well or what have you, and move on to the sort of the ground right there, the cement right there, sidewalk, and they climb up, and then the last remaining partner climbs up, does their thing, and goes out. So it has to be a careful planning. And so when we think about that, many things have to happen. You have to plan ahead of time. And if you're going out of the second story balcony, you would position the ladder before ever going inside, right? You would have the ladder up there, or at some point in time, if you're going to reposition that ladder to go through JonBenet's balcony or exit through JonBenet's balcony, just in case, right? That'd be option B, just in case she started acting crazy. Imagine, taking a 6-year-old down, a ladder on a second story balcony in the middle of the night. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's a little difficult. So that might put that out of the field of play, but there's so many things that make this crime extremely difficult to navigate, especially with trying to maneuver a 6-year-old child, while you're trying to get out. It's one thing for you to get out, right? That's one thing for you to get out. But you have to think the original thought, because we can say, oh, well, the criminal could have done this, that, and third. No. We have to think back to the fact that if the criminal broke in to take one of the children, their original thought was getting out with the child. So they had to think through the logistics of getting out with the child. Right? And so somewhere in their mind, what you're telling me is they had some sort of thought process that said, okay, this will work for us getting out with the child. Okay. Anyways, so you have to have sort of this meticulous planning, and you would probably identify your escape route and make sure that you could move quickly once you had a child. But this is the last thing that's kind of puzzling me. There's really nothing, I think, that's consistently to say that the intruder pre-planned very well. The intruder would have to exit, as we talked about, through the same difficult basement window they entered through. They would have to manage sort of this 4 to 5 foot climb in a combined space, or I'm sorry, not in a confined space, while potentially carrying or managing JonBenet. It's going to be pretty slow. It's exposed. It's the opposite of a clean extraction. And what that tells me about this scenario is that sort of this premeditated abduction includes, some sort of exit planning. It has to. And so a calculated criminal, if they were one, would have practiced such a sophisticated escape. If this person was so sophisticated, then a sophisticated perpetrator would stage the equipment that they needed beforehand. They wouldn't have just shown up with a backpack. They would have shown up with some sort of step ladder or some way to exit or get out. They wouldn't have completely or solely depended on everything in the house to escape. The intruder tells us that they believe that there's many things that the Ramseys have that can help them, that lets them know that they don't have to bring everything. But in order to escape, the intruder has to know a specific route to get in and get out, and know that there are multiple ways to get out of the house. And so they had to have been in the house several times, especially as confusing as the house was. I don't care if you went in there one time, you had to have multiple ways to get out of the house to know, okay, if anything goes down, this is how I'm going to get out of the house. But anyways, so they need to plan sort of that scenario ahead of time. And I don't think the evidence shows that. I had a question, though, because I was wondering about this chair. Somebody had said, hey, this chair that was, kind of in the basement, instead of using the Samsonite suitcase, wouldn't it make more sense for them to have used the chair to exit the window instead of, finding this random suitcase? So the chair, and I went back and did the research. The chair was blocking the train room door. I didn't know that, but the chair was blocking the train room door. And so just want to try to write my thoughts down here. In 1998, in that interview, let me write this down. Because if JonBenet was in the wine cellar, stick with me here. If JonBenet is in the wine cellar, okay, let me just read this. Let me just get it all out. I'm sorry. In 1998 interview with Lou Smith and Mike Cain, John Ramsey provides a specific account of his first solo trip to the basement, which probably occurred, which obviously was before the body was found, probably occurred between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. In this interview, John describes approaching the train room where the broken window was located and finding the entrance physically obstructed. And we've seen that in sort of crime scene videos, how dirty it was in the basement. John says that this door was kind of blocked. We had a bunch of junk down there, and there was a chair that was in front of the door. I moved the chair and went into this room. I would love to hear Fleet White's description of this. Was there a lot of junk? Was there a chair blocking? Because I believe when Fleet went down there, he went down there that morning. I would love to hear how he describes it. Does he describe a chair being down there? Does he describe anything blocking the train room? That's what I would be interested in knowing. Okay, so in the same interview in 1998, John elaborates that the obstruction wasn't just a chair, but boxes and a little chair or a bar stool kind of thing. He explains to the detectives that because of this debris, it wasn't obvious to me that anybody had gone through because I had to move the chair to get in, which I did. Now, mind you, again, Fleet White has gone down there. And so Fleet White apparently didn't go through that room door. So apparently Fleet White went down there, checked a little bit, didn't go that direction, and decided to go elsewhere. Why Fleet decided to not clear this room when he was down there is beyond us, but that might give us a little insight into the way that the basement looked as to why maybe the police decided not to go into the wine cellar when they had the first chance. And mind you, these are two spaces. If that would be the case, these are two spaces that John went in that nobody else saw that it was necessary to go into. Fleet White deciding that maybe it wasn't necessary to go into the train room, and then the police deciding that it wasn't necessary to go into the wine cellar. These would be two places that John went into that other people thought it wasn't necessary. But anyways, that's an assumption on the Fleet White part. So he says he moves the chair to get in, which he did. This detail sort of creates this logical problem with the intruder theory that if the killer had exited through the basement window inside that room, how did the chair and the boxes get placed back in front of the door on the outside, sort of the hallway side, to block John's path? In the 1998 interview, Lou Smith directly addresses this locked room paradox. He asks John, the thing I'm trying to figure out in my mind then is, if an intruder went through the door, he'd almost have to pull the chair behind him. Right. He'd have to, if he's, going through the door and then you have boxes and debris, he'd have to leave that door open and just kind of pull those things, turn around and pull those things in front of him to block that door. So he'd have to, and Lou's thinking about this, right? He'd almost have to pull the chair behind him because that would have been his exit. In response, John acknowledges the logic, but speculates on the perpetrator's mindset, stating, I mean, if this person is that bizarrely clever, they certainly are clever enough to pull the chair back when they left. And so I asked a question about the suitcase and whatnot, and the suitcase was, anyways, that's neither here nor there. My problem with this is that JonBenet was in the wine cellar. The person had done what they had done to JonBenet already. I assume around 12:30, 1 o'clock, they had done what they needed to do to JonBenet. JonBenet is now deceased. If JonBenet is deceased at this point, and she's been locked up in the wine cellar, and the latch above the wine cellar door has been placed where it needs to be to keep that door closed, this person now is scot-free to run away. They place the ransom note where it needs to be placed. JonBenet she's got the blanket around her, in the Barbie nightgown. That's all locked up in the wine cellar. That's good to go. That's been handled already. Um, Now it's going up the stairs with the bat, laying the bat outside of the butler's kitchen door, coming back in, laying the ransom note on the spiral staircase, going back downstairs and saying, "Okay, it's time for me to exit." And as I exit and I go to close the door behind, I go to the train room and I open the door, right? And instead of just going out the door, I close it behind me and I exit up, through the broken window. Here's my problem. Is the intruder worried about somebody following them through the door or catching them in the act? Did JonBenet do something that made them feel like one of the parents would come down in the basement looking for JonBenet? Because moving these boxes and this chair in front of this door is not suspicious at all. Nope, wouldn't be suspicious at all. If you are on your way out of the door and up until this point you have not been concerned with being in a hurry at all or anybody catching you, for Christ's sakes, the intruder made iced tea and fed JonBenet pineapple. Why now is the intruder worried about somebody coming behind them? That don't make no sense. Enough to try to block the door to slow you down from finding them so they can sneak out of the window scot-free. They don't have JonBenet, so it's not going to slow them down. What time did they exit the house? That's the problem I have. What time would they then have exited the house in order to be concerned about somebody walking up behind them and catching them so that they had to move the chairs back in the way to block the door? Is the criminal concerned with being caught or are they not? And that's what I'm saying. Think about this. Every single time we think about what the intruder would have, could have, should have done, there's always this many roads lead different places. You come to like a fork in the road and one lane leads here, it's here, and it's here. There's always, and I'm telling you, this is a consistent pattern with this case. There's always, you come to this one big place in the road and you can't say, oh, this looks like a shallow, direction. I'm going this direction. There's clearly a beaten path this way. There's no established paths on this road, on this fork in the road. You look down and each path is sort of like halfway done. And it's just like, so the criminal either didn't go down any of these or they took like some sort of hovercraft at the end of one of these and got out of Dodge. Because all of these exit stories are half-baked. All of a sudden he's concerned. They are concerned. These criminals are concerned about being caught when the entire night they have not moved like they've been concerned about being caught. They, for Christ's sakes, they made a decision when Burke came downstairs. They made a decision to pass up on Burke and grab and take the more difficult task. And actually, instead of going for Burke, who came down right into their hands, they decided to go up and grab JonBenet, risking the fact that Patsy gets up to check on JonBenet to see if she's used the restroom on herself. Burke may have used the restroom on herself, so he may have come into JonBenet's room at any point in time. John may have been like, oh man, we got to get up in the morning, can't sleep. Now, also too, and maybe this is just me, but the night before flying, I don't care what it is, it's very difficult to sleep for me. at least in my household, it's very difficult to sleep because we don't go to bed until like super late. Even if our flight is at 6 a.m., we don't go to bed until super late. And I mean 3 a.m. Our stuff is already packed. It's been packed for like a week. You know, the suitcase has been left open, so any last minute additions can go in and we can just close it, zip it up, you know, weigh the bag just to make sure there's no surprises at the airports. You know, the backpacks and the carry-ons are ready to go, but still somehow go to bed late doing different things. Oh, I want a snack to have on the plane, so I'm going to cut up some cheese and crackers. You know, I'm going to freeze my, you know, my drinks or what have you. So there's a lot of, you know, we're washing things at the last minute. There's a lot of last minute additions. And we don't know, as John and Patsy are preparing for the next day, if there were a lot of last minute additions that Patsy would have or John would have needed to take care of. And so they could have gotten up at any point in time just to come down and say, oh man, dang, I forgot to wrap this present. You know, I really forgot to, dang. Or man, you know what? I forgot to, you know, pack these clothes. Wow. Oh my goodness, so many things I need to do. Wow, I'm not going to get a lot of sleep. Let me go do these really quickly. So it could have been a lot of movement around that house. That's a very tight window to have to navigate to get JonBenet specifically. That means that JonBenet was the target. It was never about anything else. JonBenet was a target. Whatever happened, whatever the reason was, JonBenet was a target. I'll leave it there, but that's just something to think about for me.